Hi folks. So I don't know if you saw my post earlier, but I decided to go with whiskey. The only wine I had was red, and it's been hotter than blazes here. And red wine isn't so good when it's hot out, but a nice glass of this really good, yummy retirement rye whiskey. Thank you, Schmainards. On ice just was perfectly fits the bill. So here we are again, another Sunday night with Spooky Misty Eye. I'm glad to see you're here. I have more stories to tell tonight, and I hope your week has been good. I hope you've had, last night was the full moon. I imagine many of you had some pretty interesting dreams. It was a full moon and an eclipse, and this is a time of intent. So as you move into this next moon phase, be thinking about what you want to put out there. Be thinking about, and put it out there. Do more than think about it. Think about what you want and then put it out there. And let's make this world better for all of us, right? So here we are. Cheers. It is the 5th of July. There are still bombs bursting in air outside my door. And I say still because, yes, it's been incessant. There was a brief pause in the middle of the night last night, but it didn't last for long. I think what happened is everybody in the world, well, everybody in America, or around here anyway, knowing that there weren't going to be any official fireworks displays, went and spent their COVID money on fireworks, because holy macaroni, there were some big blasts and bongs and bangs last night as I was driving back from the woods. I went out to the woods last night. So I suppose I could just get on with the story. Hi everybody. Hi Z, I see you're there, and Elise, and well, I'm not gonna go down this rabbit hole and look and see who's here, but it's good to see you if you're here. I'm glad you're joining me tonight. Tonight I'm going to tell a couple more stories from the house where I grew up in Chicago. I have quite a few of those stories. Actually, let me show you this. I know some of you saw this on my Facebook page, but I got a couple advanced copies of my book. I am so excited. You know, putting your stories and your words into paper and then to be able to open it up and read your stories, I don't know what else feels like that, but it feels pretty good. So, yay! Thank you, Ted and Linda Parkhurst at Parkhurst Brothers Publishers, who have made this happen for me. I appreciate that. Okay, so on to the stories. I'm going to tell you more from the house that this book is about. I'm not going to tell them all. That would take to the next probably pandemic. But I'm going to tell you two more probably. If I have time, I'll tell you another little one. But so this first story is my mother's story, and my mother told this many, many times, and every time she told it, it did not change. So she didn't embellish as it grew. It was always this same story. I have to tell you a little something about my mother. My mother was very, very intuitive, very tuned in. And in the end of her life, when she had dementia at the end of her life, and she was clearly slipping in and out of places at the very end, and I knew she had probably been doing that for her whole life. She had a sense, like, I moved away when I was 18, and my whole life, you know, I lived a few years back near the family in Chicago, but generally I've lived away. And when my mother was alive, whenever I was experiencing a crisis of any kind, She didn't call me very often. She would call me from time to time, and I would call her from time to time. It wasn't like the weekly call. We did keep in touch, but it wasn't like a Sunday night call or anything like that. But when I was in crisis, whatever time of day or night I was, my phone would ring, and there would be my mother, and she would say, "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Are you okay?" And I knew that she heard me, that she felt me where she was, hundreds of miles away. And so I would talk to her and tell her what I was going through. And she's the one who told me when terrible things happened, that I was allowed to feel sorry for myself because what was happening really sucked. And and so I could feel sorry for myself for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, I need to remember that the only thing different between yesterday and today is that I have more information. And then I need to get up, and I need to keep living whatever life I have, right? Best advice ever. It has kept me, my feet and my heart in the game. My mother also one time, she was tuned into all of us, not just me. I mean, ask any of my siblings. And Granny, we called her the General. 10 children in 13 years. That's my mother. And she virtually raised us on her own. My father was the auxiliary spanker from time to time, but my mother was the one who raised us. One time we were up north in Wisconsin, and this was when I was a little older. And after I'd moved out, when my sister Mimi was a teenager, my mother got a horse. My mother always wanted a horse, and they got a family horse for up north. This horse's name was Leinenkugel, after the beer. Now this is way before it was a trendy beer. It's when it was just a little regional beer in northern Wisconsin, but it was the up north beer, and so we named the horse Leinenkugel. Well, my brother Tommy was probably 12, 13, 14 at the outset, and Tommy was a cowboy. His whole life, he was a cowboy. He listened to Waylon Jennings from age 5, and he sported a cowboy hat all the time as a kid growing up. And when he would get on that horse and ride that horse, he'd put on this beat-up, dusty, brown cowboy hat and get up on top of Leinenkugel and go riding off. And I know what he was imagining as he clip-clopped down the road and off for his ride. He was picturing himself a cowboy in the wilderness. Well, Tommy was out riding Leinenkugel, and we were all sitting in the living room up north. And all of a sudden, we were having a conversation, and my mother just stopped the conversation, stood up, bolt upright, and she said, "I'm coming, Tom." And then she told my brother Dave, who was there, "Come with me, come with me." And they left. And we were all like, it wasn't spooky because it was like, uh-oh, something happened to Tom, is what we all thought. So we waited and waited. My mother got in that car with Dave with her. No one knew where Tom was riding. He did not ride the same road every time he went out. He did not tell anybody where he was going. My mother drove directly to where my brother was laying on the road unconscious. The horse had been spooked by something and reared back and knocked him off. And Tom was unconscious by the side of the road with Leinenkugel standing nearby. So she went right to him, brought him back to the house. Somebody else went and got Leinenkugel, and they took him to the hospital, and he had a serious concussion. But when he bonked his dome, my mother knew, and she knew right where to find him. And she did. So that's how my mother's in tune to things. I know many mothers are in tune to their children. My mother was kind of a special in tune. I get my awareness of different things, of the spirit world, I guess, from both parents and from where I grew up. So here's one of my mother's stories from where I grew up. So when we were little, my dad worked for the phone company, and he worked 8-hour shifts every weekday. And it was a good living, but he always wanted to be a lawyer. So despite getting poo-pooed by some family members, my mom and her parents encouraged him to go to law school. And so he took the entrance exams. At that time, I'm not sure what it was. And he was admitted to Loyola Law School, and he went at night. So he worked all day, and then he went to school. I gotta fix my chair, excuse me a second. Didn't that boom sound like a fireworks boom? There, that's a little better. I'm still here. Anyway, so my dad worked days and then went to school at night. And this meant that on many weeknights when he had classes, he would leave for work and catch the train at 7:30 in the morning, and he wouldn't return till 9:30 at night, which meant that my mother had 5 children under 5 that she did everything for. And she did. She just did it. She loved it. She was amazing. On rainy days, she'd turn the whole living room into a playground. She'd pull a leaf out of the dining room table, put it on the couch, and we'd have a slide. She'd build forts with us. We played and played with her. And then on top of that, she did all the laundry, she cooked, she cleaned, she bathed, she dressed, she did everything for us. Kissed all the boo-boos, spanked all the bottoms. So my dad's working, and he's at law school, meaning my mother's home at night. And we would go to bed early, and we had been in bed for a couple hours maybe. And in that time, she'd feed us supper, and then she'd take a plate and cover it with tin foil and put it on low in the oven, so for my dad before microwave, so that when he came home, he'd have a hot meal when he got home at 9 or 9:30. But she had finished all the chores she was going to do for one night, and she noticed that it was about 8 o'clock, and she loved to watch The Rifleman. I don't know if any of you are old and remember that show, but there was another cowboy. Anyway, so she turns off, the kitchen light and heads into the living room. And now the way the house was is, I think I told you a little bit about this last time, but you'd come in the front door, and straight ahead was this long, narrow hallway. At the very end of the hall, there was nothing on the right side. Well, there was an archway door to the living room, and then the hallway, and then a smaller archway that went into the dining room. The living room and the dining room had big open space, but there was still an archway in between them, delineating the 2 separate rooms. At the end of that long hallway was a small bedroom, and then on the left was the door to the basement, and directly to the left when you walk in were the stairs going upstairs. Now, this staircase, this was a Victorian house. It was built in the I'm going to get it wrong, late 1800s. It was the first house built in the area. And the staircase it was a beautiful staircase. It had 18 stairs going up, so the house had high ceilings. And the railing had, down at the bottom, it had a thicker pillar and like a swirled oak part, and then the railing went all the way up the 18 stairs. Then it curved around, and the upstairs hall was open, only you could see by the railing. So standing at the bottom of the stairs, you could look up, follow that railing all the way around, and see all the way to the bedroom door where we slept. We slept in the front room, where Annie saw the man in the corner. So my mom sits down on the couch. She tucks her feet up under her, turns on the TV, remote, goes and climbs on the couch, tucks her feet up under her, and takes out her pack of Herbert Tarryton cigarettes. They don't even make those anymore, but that was her brand. Takes one out and lights a cigarette and sits back in the peace and quiet to watch The Rifleman. And as she's watching, she hears somebody walking upstairs. And at first, it just sounded like she just heard a couple of footsteps. And she thought, oh crap, one of the kids is up. Now we'd been asleep for a couple hours, so if somebody was up, it might have meant that somebody was sick or something. So she gets up, puts her cigarette in the ashtray, turns down the TV, and walks to the bottom of the stairs to listen. And she doesn't call up yet because she doesn't want to wake us up if we were sleeping. And she doesn't hear anything. And so she goes back to her place on the couch, turns up the TV just a little, not all the way where it was, just so she could still hear, but just a little. And as she goes to turn it up, she hears the footsteps in the hallway upstairs. And these are deliberate, slow footsteps. So she turns the TV all the way down and stands there and listens as she hears these footsteps walking down the upstairs hallway. And it does not sound like a child, she said. It sounded like an adult man. A heavy footsteps, labored footsteps. And she went to her cigarette and she snuffed it out in the ashtray and stood there a minute, and she could still hear the footsteps. So she went to the bottom of the stairs and she looked up to see if she could see anybody. Now the bathroom light was on and the door to the bathroom was open both to the hallway and to our bedroom, and it was casting light all through the hallway. The downstairs hallway light was on, so it was well lit. It was not dark in any way. And she couldn't see anything, but she still heard these footsteps. So she called up to us, and she called first one and then the other and the other. She said, "Is that you? Annie, is that you?" And there was no answer. And now she's getting this kind of uh-oh feeling. She's just getting this hair standing up kind of feeling that something is not right. And she's leaning on that railing with her hand, and she's looking up and waiting to see somebody, maybe coming out of one of the other rooms. She's fully expecting to see a real human intruder upstairs, which had her very nervous. And she was holding onto the railing, and the footsteps, step, 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 right to the top of the stairs. Now, this old house had wood floors, and different boards creaked in different ways. One groaned, another squeaked, another creaked, and you could tell where somebody was, even if you were tiptoeing, because the boards had a musical rhythm to them. And she knew that whatever there was at the top of the stairs, but she could see nothing. And so she just kind of, hand on the railing, looking up, waiting to see something. And suddenly, she heard the creak of the top step, and the railing heaved and groaned. She could feel the railing heave. Remember, this whole railing was connected, so if somebody leaned heavily on it at the top, the bottom would give. She pulled her hand away and stepped back and put her hand on the outside door to go out. She told us that she was trying to see if she saw somebody. She knew that she could run into the street and get help with grandma next door or somebody, that she knew she could get help right away. But she didn't see anybody. And as she stood there, back, with her hand on the front door handle, she could hear the step, creak, and the railing heave. And the next step, just slow as slow could be. And she started to pray. She said, "Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and Saint Michael the Archangel, protect me." She said, "Dear God, if this is evil, send it away. If this is evil, send it away. If this is evil, send it away." Step, step, down toward her. Something she could not see, but she knew in every cell in her body was there. Something was there. She could hear it. She could feel it. The steps slowly continued until it got to the fourth step from the bottom, and it stopped. My mother's anxiety did not decrease. She stood there watching and looking upstairs and looking on the staircase, and she told us that it was the most horrible feeling because she was standing at the bottom of the stairs. We were upstairs. All of her children were upstairs in this bedroom, and there was something unknown that she could not see, that she could not fight between us and her. And she stood there with her hand on that door, ready to run for help if she could see anything. She knew she couldn't run for help if she heard something scary. She had to know there was a danger there. She knew, but she had to see. She stood there, watching and watching and listening until suddenly the doorknob turned in her hand and she jumped back, and it was my father finally coming home. And he said, "Whoa, you're meeting me at the door." And she looked at him, and he looked so tired that she decided not to trouble him by saying anything. My mother always protected my father from everything. She would go through, walk across embers to protect him from anything, anxiety, anything. And can you hear all the bombs bursting in air out there? It's got to stop sometime soon. Anyway, so my mom said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're home." And she didn't tell him about her day. She said, "I've got supper for you. Go change your clothes, and I'll go get your supper." And so he went to the room at the end of the hall to change out of his work clothes. And she went to the kitchen. And as she was preparing the plate, pulling it out of the warm oven, and pulling a dish towel out for his napkin, she told herself, there have been squirrels on the roof. A lot. I've seen a lot of squirrels. There's a big squirrel nest right outside that big tree. And I'll bet that what I heard was just squirrels on the roof. I'll bet there's an opening, and I bet they're getting in the attic. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing squirrels in the attic. That's what I'm hearing. And she told herself this, and she comforted herself, and she carried the plate into my father, who by this time was now sitting on the couch with his feet up. And she placed his supper in his lap and let him talk about his day. And every once in a while, she'd just glance over at the stairs and smile and listen to him and pet his shoulder or his hand. And she felt safer with him there. So the next night, certain that it was squirrels in the attic or on the roof, once again, we're all in bed, and she's home alone. My dad's at school. And she's finishing up in the kitchen and comes out, same thing, about 8 o'clock, and sits down once again to watch some television. And she turned it on, but she kept the volume really low because she just had a feeling that she just anticipated something, because my mother had feelings and she learned to believe them. Sat down on the couch with the TV on soft, when again she started to hear footsteps. Only this time, the steps were in the bedroom, not in the hallway. She didn't even have time to light her cigarette. She leapt up from the couch, turned the television completely off, and took her post at the bottom of the stairs, looking up those stairs. Again, she called on St. Michael the Archangel and all the saints to protect her. She heard the footsteps in the bedroom, exit the door to the hallway, and slowly, step, creak, step, creak. This slow track again to the top of the stairs. This time she did not put her hand on the railing. This time she crossed herself. She said, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, if this is evil, send it away. If it's good, give me the grace and courage to face it." Now, my mother was raised a Catholic, and you can't just wish everything away, because what if it's like Gabriel the Archangel coming to tell you great news from God or something? You have to be ready to accept a visitation, but you also have to be ready to expel a visitation of another kind. So she prayed this, and she stood there, looking once again, her heart beating wildly in her chest, breathing quietly, listening and watching as once again, whatever it was, one step after another, she could see the railing move with the weight of whoever or whatever it was leaning on that railing as it descended the stairs again, down, closer and closer to her. She took comfort that it was coming toward her and not toward her children. She didn't know what she would do if she had to face something like that heading toward her children. As long as it was coming away from us, she was just going to stand guard, praying silently under her breath. Dear God, if it's evil, send it away. Dear God, if it's evil, send it away. Send it away. If it's evil, send it away. And again, fourth step from the bottom, it stopped. She took a step backwards, wondering if it would happen again, and sort of moved her body close to the front door. She didn't have her hand on the door handle this time, but she was ready to run if she needed to, for help, not run away, run for help. And I have to tell you, the other time when I told stories of my childhood home, I told you about the Slinky Lady, and the Slinky Lady moved up and down those stairs in that hallway every night like clockwork, but she never made a sound. She glided silently. There was never a footstep associated with her. So this was something different. And my poor mother stood there in that front hall, watching like a mother lion, ready to run if something threatened us, until my father again opened the front door. I'm gonna drink a little water. I'm getting a dinosaur in my throat. Boy, that rye whiskey is good. Thanks, Schmanerts. Anyway, once again, she didn't trouble my father. She just got him his supper, listened to him tell about his day. He asked how she was, and she told him, oh, just fine. You know, this one said this funny thing today, that one said that funny thing today. She had to get after so-and-so because they didn't put their clean clothes away or whatever. But he didn't want to hear that stuff, so she didn't tell him much of that. She just listened to him tell stories about his world. So when they went to bed, before they went to bed, their room was downstairs, and my mother did not do this very often. When we were in bed, we were in bed. And if we woke up and needed her, we came and got her, or called for her, and she would come. But she didn't make it a habit to just come check on us. And this night, she decided she was going to do that. And my dad said, are you sure? They've been asleep for hours. I'm sure they're fine. You don't have to go up and check on them. She says, I know, I just want to do that. And so she did. She came up. And she said she just went to each of our beds and looked at us and made sure that we were sleeping soundly. And as she did, she looked around the room, and she looked in the bathroom, and she looked in the 2 other rooms upstairs, just to make sure that there was nothing there that she could see. And then she went back downstairs, not fully convinced that everything was okay, but this time when she was up there, she looked out the small bedroom window and she saw the big oak tree, I guess it was an oak or a maple, some big tree next to the house. And she said to herself, oh, I'll bet it was windy. And what I heard was branches hitting the side of the house. And she told herself, you know that how a tree in the wind, when it moves, it'll sometimes groan, and that's probably what she heard, the sound of a tree groaning, not the railing groaning, she told herself. It was the tree hitting the side of the house. That's what it was. Because as she stood there earlier that night and listened, she said, that is not squirrels in the attic. It is not squirrels on the roof. Squirrels are not running around at night anyway. She knew it didn't sound like squirrels. And so this night, she said, branches, that would do it. Tree branches in the wind. I'll bet it was windy tonight. Okay. She felt a lot better. She went back downstairs. My father finished his supper. They watched the evening news with Fahey Flynn. and then they got in their bed. And my mother always felt safer with my father there in the bed. She always felt better having him there. But still, she was troubled, and she listened. And she would drift off to sleep, and then she would wake and listen. And then she'd sleep some more and wake and listen. So the next day, we just went on with what we did, and 4 or 5 kids, under 5, I think 5, running around and creating mayhem, and my mother right in there trying to be the general and keep things running smoothly. And then again, we were put in bed, and again she went downstairs and took my father's supper plate and covered it with tin foil and put in the oven so that it would be warm and not dried out by the time he got home. And again, she knew she was ready. She wasn't ready. But she had a little bit of an expectation this time. She went back in the living room. She turned the TV on. And just before she flipped the channel to the channel away from our cartoon channel, well, there were 3 channels, to what she wanted to watch, she heard it upstairs again. She heard those footsteps upstairs again. And she just said to herself, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, that is not tree branches on the side of the house. Those are footsteps. And she stood at the bottom of those stairs. She didn't know what to do. She had no idea what to do. If it was a living person, she knew she could do something about it. If she even saw something, she knew she could do something about it. But this was just something completely out of her control, between her children and her, walking step by step down the hall, and step by step down those stairs. As it came down again, this time, I forgot to tell you this, she had her rosary ready, and she picked up that rosary, and she started saying her rosary standing at the bottom of the stairs, just praying for protection and praying that if it's evil, it will go away. Once again, the steps came to the 4th step from the bottom. I have no idea the significance of that. But it did, and it stopped. And she stayed at the bottom of those steps, praying that rosary, until just before 9:15 when my dad would come home. And she went and tucked the rosary back in her little purse so he didn't see she had it and know that she had been worried. And went and stood in the living room, away from the front door so he wouldn't become suspicious, and listen and watch the stairs from the living room until my father got home. And still, she didn't tell him anything. She felt silly. She felt that she was, she always told us that what we saw was our eyes playing tricks on us. And what we heard was our vivid imagination. And when we had things moved, it was some other kid who had moved it. Or when we felt someone touch us, it was some other imagination thing. So as we watched or heard or felt things in the house, we would say to ourselves, it's only my vivid imagination. I'm only seeing things. It's my eyes playing tricks on me. My eyes were really tricky back then. So this night again, fortunately, it was a Thursday night or Friday night. My dad didn't have to go to work, to school the next night. So through the weekend, when he was there, she didn't even try to listen for it. Although when they were sitting in the living room, she kind of paid attention to the stairs, and she didn't come check on us each night. She just kind of, we called my mother Cleopatra, the queen of denial. Denial is a really good mental health tool for a time. Oh, this is all melted down. I'm going to pour a little bit more of this. Boom. So then after the weekend, once again, shouldn't try to rationalize it this time. I have a little cup of ice here. I came prepared. Not my first rodeo. She didn't try to rationalize it this time. She knew something was there, but she had no idea what it was. And she had been praying, and it didn't go away. So she figured it probably wasn't evil. So she prayed for the grace and the courage to accept it, whatever it was. My brave mama. And night after night, this continued for a couple of weeks. Every night, she was there by herself. Every single night. She no longer had any rationalizations to use. So one afternoon, she was at my grandmother's house, who lived next door, by the way. This is my father's mother. And she lived in a little brick bungalow next door. And she had grown up in that house. It was her mother who owned the house, and we rented it from her mother, who, when she was like 90, she went and lived at a rest home up by her oldest daughter, Teresa, up near Madison. But we paid for the rent. My folks paid rent for that house that belonged to my great-grandmother. And my grandma had grown up there. So my mom's sitting there at her house, and she would go over in the afternoon, and my grandma had real severe arthritis. And so my mother helped her with housework and helped get supper stuff together. She ran our house, and she did that at my grandma's house too, because that's who she was. That is so tasty. And my grandma was sitting there with the newspaper. My grandma got the newspaper every day, and she would turn immediately to the death notices, she called them. They call it the Irish sports page in Chicago. I don't know if they call it other places. But my grandma would peruse the death notices in the Chicago Tribune, looking to see who in the parish had passed, if there was anyone she knew, and if there was a wake she would have to go to so she could plan her week's itinerary. So my grandma's looking at the death notices, and my mom just very nonchalantly mentioned something to her, and she says, "You know, Ma," she called her Ma, "you know, Ma," she said, I think I'm getting a little antsy with Dave gone every night to school." She said, "It's the funniest thing. Every night for the past few weeks, I keep hearing something, and it's probably nothing. It's probably just squirrels in the attic or branches hitting the house or something, but it sounds a lot like footsteps." Now, she's watching my grandmother, who still has her face down looking at the death notices. And she's watching my grandma for her to look up shocked and think she's crazy. My mom and my grandma, for years, my grandma resented my mom a lot. My dad was going to be a priest, and she called my mother that woman for years and years. This was at a time when she was still that woman. And so she's looking to see if my grandmother gets any disapproving or looks, because the last thing she needs is to be that crazy woman. And Grandma Shippers just keeps looking at the death notices, and my mom goes on. She said, "It sounds crazy, but it sounds like somebody, like slow, heavy footsteps in the hall, and then coming down the stairs. I think I'm just, by the end of the day, I'm just tired, and I just, I'm just there by myself, and I'm spooking myself out." And now she looks up at my grandma. My grandma's looking right at her, and she says, "Oh, no. Don't worry about that." And then she looks back down at her paper, and my mother just waits. And she said, you don't have to worry about that. It's just Pa. And she looks back down at her paper, and my mom says, Pa? And she says, yeah, Pa. Now my mother is thinking to herself, Pa? Like Dave's grandpa? And she says, you mean your father? And she says, yep. And my mother says, but he's been dead for more than 20 years. And my grandma looks right at her and she says, well, you know that, and I know that, but I'm not sure Pa knows that. Now, my mother said you could have knocked her over with a feather. She was just gobsmacked. She had to make sure her mouth wasn't hanging open as my grandmother went on. She said a lot of people have seen him there right after he died and until my mother moved out. Now, this is my great-grandma who we rented from. She said, my mother said that from the day that he died, every night when she got in bed, she could feel him come and sit on his side of the bed and reach over and take her hand. And she said that for her entire time she lived there, Tommy, her husband, Pa would come and hold my mother's hand through the night. She said it was very comforting to her to know that he was still there looking out for her and she wasn't by herself. And my mother's like, up. And this is 1960, this is not now when people talk openly about ghosts and spooks. However, my grandmother was extremely superstitious. She not only believed in ghosts, she believed in leprechauns and fairies and firmly, which she was right on the money actually, and but nobody talked about this stuff then, and my mother was pretty shocked. My grandma went on and she said, when Teresa was here, when Pa was, just after Pa died, she was here. Teresa got married shortly after Pa died. And she was upstairs. She got married in the house. And she was upstairs putting her makeup on at the vanity. And she said that Pa just walked right in. Just walked right into the bedroom where she was. And he hadn't been dead long, my grandma says. And he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a real solid human being. And he walked right in. And so Teresa said, Pa, I'm so glad you're here. And all of a sudden it dawned on her that Pa had passed away. But being in this Irish family, this was not so unusual, I suppose. Teresa said that she said, how are you? And he said, I don't know. He said, where is everyone? I keep calling all of you. I keep calling everybody, and nobody answers. Where is everybody? And she told him, she gave him like the news about the family. She just gave him the rundown about what everybody was doing and where they were and what Gerald was doing and how she was marrying Eddie and all the news. And he just listened and nodded, standing there in the doorway. And then she said, I forget exactly what she said, but soon he just turned and left. And right after she left, it really hit her that she had just had a conversation with a dead person. So she jumped up and went to the door to see if he was walking down the hallway toward the stairs, and he had disappeared. Of course he disappeared. But he was walking down the hallway toward the stairs. She said, the way you described those footsteps, that's exactly how my father sounded at the end of his life. And my mother said, you mean the ghost of your father is in the house where I'm living? And she says, yeah. She says, don't worry about it. He's harmless. What you do is just when you hear him, just tell him who you are. He probably doesn't know who you are or who the kids are. Tell him you're Davy's wife and that those kids are his grandchildren, and ask him to leave you alone. Ask him not to scare you. And my mother's like, okay, So she's thinking, this woman has gone off it's just, she wasn't sure. If she hadn't heard those footsteps herself, she would have thought my grandmother had totally sprung a screw loose in her head. But she'd heard the steps, so she was prepared the next night. That night, actually. This time she didn't even turn on the television. This time she didn't even sit on the couch. Right about the same time, 8, a little after 8, she waited and waited in the living room until she heard the footsteps upstairs. Exactly the same way. She knew now what she was hearing was the sound of an old man dragging his weary body down the hallway toward the stairs. As soon as he reached the top of the stair, she took a deep breath. She crossed herself, and she spoke to him. She didn't speak out loud, she said. She said, I didn't want to speak out loud because I didn't want anything to answer me. But she spoke in her thoughts, and she sent her thoughts to him, and she said, see, she was already intuitive about how to talk to ghosts. She told him, Pa, my name is Jackie. I'm Davy's wife. Those little children up there are your grandchildren. We live here now. Grandma Lyons is up near Teresa. She's doing well. Everyone is doing well. It's okay for us to be here. It's okay for you to be here. I don't need you to go, but you're scaring me. Please, stop scaring me. Don't scare the children, and don't scare me anymore. Now the steps came down like 2 steps, and as soon as she asked him not to scare her, they stopped. And from that night forward, she never heard those footsteps on the stairs. He didn't leave. He was clearly still there. Many of us saw him, heard him, felt him, but he didn't scare my mother at night anymore. So that's one of the traditional stories from that house. I have about 15 minutes. I wonder if I have enough time to tell. Sorry, that was the chair again. I wonder if I have enough time to tell this next story. Maybe I won't dawdle, I'll just tell it. Okay, so when I was a kid, we all helped out around the house. We had chores, and these chores rotated. And every night, every kid helped with the dishes. I remember being just before my 3rd birthday, because you didn't have to do dishes until you were 3. And I remember standing in the kitchen and gloating at my 2 older siblings who had to work in the kitchen because I didn't have to yet, because I wasn't 3 yet. I'm such an a-hole. Anyway, then I was 3, and then I was probably about 7. And all of us did the dishes, and one kid, maybe 8, one kid washed the dishes, another kid dried the dishes, another kid put the dishes away, somebody else cleared the table, and somebody else swept the floor. And the top jobs, the most favorite jobs, was clearing the table, because usually my mother was there and she would help put all the leftovers away. There were almost never leftovers, but she would put the plate for my dad and put food away if there was food, and help with the clearing of the table. And that person got done first. Now, after we finished the dishes, we'd all go in the living room and pick a TV show, and we'd all watch one of the TV shows that were on the 3 channels we had choices to watch, and watch TV for an hour or so. For years and years, I had to go to bed at 8:30, and so I watched half of Bonanza, because Bonanza started at 8, and I never saw the ending of Bonanza. Finally, when it was on those vintage TV shows, and I saw a whole episode, I realized how much I didn't miss not seeing the second half. It was all the same every time. Anyway, so we all helped with the dishes. And on this particular night, it was a Sunday night, my dad was home. And Sunday nights, we would watch our favorite TV show, Lassie. And Lassie, I don't know if you remember Lassie, but Lassie was a collie dog, and we could not have a dog. We had too many kids to have a dog. And, but we loved that show, and Timmy, Lassie always rescued Timmy, and he had the most perfect family. Nobody ever yelled at anybody. I don't think he ever was spanked in his life, but we loved to watch Lassie, and it was always a great adventure. Well, we also, growing up, had this pact with one another. It was an unspoken covenant that we would not leave each other alone in that house. We would stick together. It was the buddy system. It was the unwritten buddy system. If somebody woke up at night and had to go to the bathroom, nobody got upset if you got woken up to stand guard while they went to the bathroom. That was just the way it was. So this night, however, my job was putting dishes away, and there were a whole lot of big bowls. Now, whose idea is it to store the big glass bowls or stainless steel bowls even up on the top shelf of the cupboard when you got a 7-year-old putting those dishes away? I'd have to pull up a big wooden kitchen chair up to the counter, stand on that, and stretch all the way up to put those bowls on top. Now, the person who put dishes away and the person who swept were always the last ones out of the kitchen. And usually we would wait for each other. But this night, for some reason, there must have been a falling out with my younger sister because she was not talking to me. And everybody else had left the kitchen, and it was just she and I. And she is sweeping like a crazy person. Sweep, sweep, sweep so fast. And I see she's racing me to get out of the kitchen first. Last one out had to shut off the lights, and the last one out got the worst place to sit out there. Both of us, we knew, would be sitting on the floor. There was not enough couch seating for everybody. So I said to her, please, please, please wait for me. I'm almost done. Don't leave without me. Just wait for me. Now, even though it was early on a Sunday night, it was fall, and it was Chicago, and it was pitch dark out. And it was, I'm racing to try to get these dishes put away. And there's a bunch of silverware, and there's a bunch of dishes. I have no idea what was for dinner that night, but there were a lot of dishes to put away. And I'm trying to go as fast as I can when I see my sister sweep all the dust into the dustpan and go over to the trash bin and dump it in, and she turned and gave me one dirty look. Put the dustbin and the broom in the corner and hightailed it for the living room before I could do anything. And I was like, and now I'm alone in the kitchen, all the way in the back of the house. My whole family is in the living room, 2 rooms away, all the way in the front of the house. And I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm feeling exactly like Cinderella, actually. No fair, no fair. Everybody's out there watching TV. And I say to myself, okay, just get it done. And I start to get really nervous. And I look around and I just tell myself, okay, this is just my imagination. I could feel something. I could feel something in that room. It's just your imagination. It's just you're panicking because you're here by yourself. Just put the dishes away and go out to the living room. And so I pushed that chair up for one last time. You had to pull the chair out to put the stuff in the bottom cupboard and then push it back in to put the stuff in the top. I hadn't figured out how to organize and do a whole set once and then the other. Anyway, so I pushed the chair back up to put like the last big stainless steel bowl up on top. I got it on the shelf, and just as it hit the shelf, suddenly, boom, every light in the house went out. And I stood there. And it was pitch black. You know, it had just been bright, the bright kitchen light, the dining room light. Every light in the house was on. Whenever we were there, every light in the house was burning. And they were now all completely off. And I stood on this chair with my back to this room as I felt the unmistakable presence of something terrible coming close to me. Now, that house had the Slinky Lady. That house had my great-grandfather. That house had other spirits that appeared in closets or corners or here and there. All those were human spirits. What I felt had no empathy. What I felt was not a human spirit. I don't know what it was. I kind of have an idea now, but at that time I had no idea what it was. All I knew was that something was invading my space right next to my face. And pretty soon, it was almost like I could smell it. I could feel its breath. And it was not hot breath. It was like cold breath right next to my ear. And I went, and it moved back. And I was like, okay, it's gone. but I couldn't move, and I tried to call my mother, Mom, and I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find my voice. And I stood there completely alone, standing on a chair with my back facing that terrifying, black, empty, full room, when suddenly I felt icy fingers at my heels. I wasn't wearing shoes or socks. And I felt these icy fingers slowly make their way up my legs, up my body, up my back, and I stood perfectly still, trying not to breathe, trying not to move, and I could feel it. It felt as though it was tasting my soul. It felt as though, it came up my back to my neck, and I could feel it in my hair. And as those fingers went over my head toward my face, somehow I found my voice, and I screamed the top of my lungs, Mommy! And instantly it was gone, and I heard my mother's voice. Come on in here, the TV's on. Come sit with us in here. You could see in here, the TV is on. So I just jumped off that chair. I ran like a bat out of hell out of that kitchen. I ran through the dining room, banging myself, stubbing my toes, hitting on the dining room chairs and table, and I leapt onto that couch, right on between my mother and father. They were sitting right side to side. My mother was holding the baby, and I just jumped in between them and wiggled myself down in between them. The baby started to cry, and everybody is like huge wide-eyed, including my parents. And we're all kind of looking around, and the entire house is completely black, but the friggin' television is still on. As Timmy runs to get help or as Lassie runs to get help for Timmy, who had got trapped in a well or something. And we looked outside, and my mom remarked, well, no other houses have lost their lights. It must be us. And said, why does this keep happening? This happened all the time. Not the TV staying on, but the lights going out, flickering, and just going out for a few minutes. And my mom said, oh, it's just old wiring. Now, this was old wiring. This was like cloth-covered wiring that was installed in the turn of the century, not the 21st century, the 20th century. So the wiring was pretty janky. So that was a pretty good explanation. And I felt so safe between my mom and dad until I realized I could feel my dad's tension. And I could feel his leg, his knee bouncing up and down as he was shaking. And I could see beads of sweat on his forehead, even though it was still cold in the living room. It was always cold in that house. And he's just kind of looking around in the dark, beyond the television dark. And my mom said, it must be a fuse that blew again. And he says, okay, I guess I have to go change the fuse. I gotta tell you, the fuse box was in the basement. That house was terrifying, but that basement was especially terrifying. I could not imagine my father going alone in the dark into that basement. All of us watched him in horror as he asked my mother, where's the goddamn flashlight? And my mom said, it's in the top drawer of the credenza. Now, this was a big, I don't know if it was built in, but it was there when we were there. It was there when my great-grandma was there. It was this big cupboard in the dining room just along the wall. So when you were looking in the credenza, if you looked to your left, you could see the basement door. So my dad starts cursing. Goddamn son of a bitch. He gets up out of his chair and he's walking slowly towards the credenza and he pulls that door open. Now, this credenza, every drawer in the credenza was a junk drawer, but that top credenza drawer was a really stuffed full junk drawer. And my dad is cursing and saying words I had not heard yet in my life and pulling things out and throwing them on top of the credenza, just swearing up a storm. And finally he gets a hold of the old flashlight and he turns it on. And there's this super dim beam comes out of it. It doesn't even penetrate a foot. And he says, son of a bitch. And he turns it off and he bangs the back and shakes it, as if that's going to do something. But it seemed to do something. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. And he turned it back on. The beam was a little bit brighter. And he stands there and he aims it at that basement door and we are all watching him. and he takes steps toward the basement. Now, once he got in that hallway, we could no longer see him. But what we could see was the flashlight beam, because that hallway, you know, it was shining in the hallway where we could still see. And we watched that flashlight go around and around like he was shining that light all over the place. In that hallway, not opening the door yet, you would hear him cursing and cursing under his breath, and cursing louder and louder, not under his breath. And then he gets quiet, and the flashlight beam isn't bouncing around, and we hear the click of the basement doorknob. It opened just a little ways, and boom, every light in the house went out. My father ran at a full speed ahead. He just we heard him slam that basement door. He ran past the credenza, threw that flashlight in the credenza, did not close the door, ran back to the couch, plopped himself down on the couch, and with his eyes just bugging out of his head, he's like, okay, I guess everything's okay now. And we're all just looking, and Lassie is still, you know, and my sister Annie, who was, you know, I'd look up at the clouds and say, oh, look, it's a snowman. And she'd say, cumulonimbus. She looks at the TV and she says, hey, Mom, Dad, how come the TV stayed on? And my mom says, it's just old wiring. And she says, no, it couldn't be, because, look, it's plugged into that same outlet as the lamp. It's plugged into the same thing as that lamp. And the lamp went out, but the TV stayed on. You know, TVs back then had tubes. She said, I don't think the tubes could keep going for that long. How could that stay on that long when the lights were off for that long a time? And my mother said, old wiring. And my father said, Jesus Christ. And that's a true story. Lights went out all the time. Lights flickered all the time. Lights all the time. So it's 11:01. We've spent another hour here. I hope you enjoyed those stories. I don't know if enjoyed is the word. They were pretty friggin' terrifying, I think. So much in that house was so terrifying. I thought for years and years, sometimes things that scare us have a bigger story, you know. As I learned about this house more. So here we are. I don't know how many weeks this is. I know I counted them last week, but I lose track of days. I lose track of times. If you've missed any of the stories, they are all posted on this page, so feel free to go back and check them out and share this with your friends and your enemies. Tell them to put it on just before bed. No, I'm kidding. I love listening to ghost stories before I go to bed. You all take care of yourselves. I say this every night. This pandemic. You know, I imagine that during the plague years, you know, in hundreds of years ago, 1,000 years ago, when people had to hunker down and in quarantine, I imagine they sat around and told stories. And though we can't sit around together, we're so lucky to be able to have this connection where we could still listen to stories and tell stories. Be good to one another. Be patient. Be kind. Please wear a mask. I don't want it to be like this for a year, 2 years. If we all just do the public health thing, we could start going out. We could start seeing each other more. So don't turn it into a fight. Remember that we do this for all of us, right? For all of us. Okay, enough preaching. Hey, thanks for this really, really delicious ride, the Schmaynards. I had said I was going to wait to open it until we could get together again, but I suppose we're together a little way here. Have a good night. Sleep well. Mwah. I love you all.